Emma Carter had it all, or at least, that's what everyone thought. A successful husband, a beautiful suburban home, and 13 years of marriage that looked picture perfect from the outside. But perfection is often an illusion, a carefully curated facade hiding the cracks beneath. And Emma's life was about to shatter in a way she never saw coming. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly. But there was something missing, an invisible void she couldn't quite define. Routine had taken over. Passion had faded into predictability. Conversations with her husband, Ryan, were functional rather than meaningful. They talked about their son's school, mortgage payments, weekend grocery runs, everything except each other. It wasn't that Ryan had changed. He was still the same devoted, responsible man she had married. He worked hard, loved their family, and always came home on time. But there was no fire anymore. No stolen glances across the dinner table, no impulsive kisses in the hallway. Just familiarity. And sometimes, familiarity felt like a cage. That's why, when her friend Jessica suggested a massage appointment at an exclusive spa downtown, Emma agreed without hesitation. "You need this," Jessica had insisted. "A real escape. Not just another manicure or a coffee date. Trust me, you'll come out of there feeling like a new woman." Emma had smiled, nodding along, not realizing just how prophetic Jessica's words would turn out to be. The massage salon was nothing like she expected. It wasn't a sterile, impersonal chain but a boutique-style retreat hidden in an elegant high-rise building. Dim lighting, the soft sound of water trickling from a decorative fountain, the faint scent of lavender in the air, everything exuded relaxation and seduction. She almost backed out when she saw the name on the appointment slip. Liam. It wasn't that she was uncomfortable with a male masseuse, but something about the name sent a strange, fluttering sensation through her stomach. She brushed it off, reminding herself she was here to unwind, not to overthink. Then she met him. Liam was breathtaking. Mid-30s, tall, with the kind of sculpted physique that suggested he knew exactly how to use his strength. His deep blue eyes held a quiet intensity, and when he spoke, his voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. "Emma? Right this way." His touch was professional, at first. Warm hands pressing into her tense shoulders, slow movements easing the knots in her back. But there was something else, something unsaid but undeniably there. A lingering pause, a breath too close to her ear, fingertips that seemed to explore rather than just massage. Emma told herself it was nothing. Just her imagination. But the way her body responded betrayed her. The heat that pooled in her stomach, the involuntary shiver that ran down her spine, this wasn't just a massage. And then, as if sensing the shift in the air, Liam leaned in slightly, his voice a hushed murmur. "You carry a lot of tension here," he said, his fingers pressing just above her waist. "You should let go." Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the way his hands felt against her skin, or the way his voice seemed to reach inside her, pulling at something buried deep. Or maybe it was the realization that she hadn't felt this alive in years. As she lay there, heart pounding, one thought echoed in her mind: what if I do? Emma barely recognized herself. Her breath was unsteady, her skin burning with an unfamiliar heat. She had come here for relaxation, to melt away the tension that had built up over years of routine and quiet longing. But instead, she was caught in something far more dangerous. Liam's hands moved lower, his fingers working deep into her lower back. The pressure was firm, deliberate, yet it sent waves of pleasure up her spine. "You're holding on to so much," he murmured, his voice like velvet. "Sometimes, the body tells us things the mind tries to ignore." Emma swallowed hard. Was he reading her thoughts? Because everything he said felt painfully true. She was holding on to something, years of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman who never once dared to step outside the lines of her marriage. And yet, here she was, trembling beneath the touch of a stranger. She should stop this. She needed to stop this. But her body had other plans. When Liam's fingers brushed the sensitive skin just above her hip, a quiet gasp escaped her lips. His touch stilled for a moment, as if waiting. And then, slowly, he leaned closer. "Emma, do you want me to stop?" Silence. The only sound in the dimly lit room was the soft rhythm of her breathing, the distant hum of spa music playing somewhere in the background. She could say yes. She could get up, walk out, pretend this moment had never happened. But instead, she turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. Her lips parted, and in the faintest whisper, she answered. No. A knowing smile touched Liam's lips. Then let's make this unforgettable. And with that, the line between right and wrong disappeared forever. Emma's world tilted as she let those two dangerous letters slip from her lips. No. It was an invitation, a confession, a surrender to the hunger that had been growing inside her for longer than she cared to admit. And Liam understood. He didn't ask again. He didn't hesitate. His hands, once methodical and professional, took on a new purpose. They traced the curve of her back, exploring the lines of her body in ways no one had for years. Emma closed her eyes, surrendering to the sensation, allowing herself to drown in the intoxicating mix of tension and anticipation. She had spent 13 years being the perfect wife. The faithful, reliable, predictable wife. But at that moment, she was none of those things. She was something else entirely, something raw, reckless, and unchained. Liam's lips hovered near her ear. "You're beautiful, Emma." A shudder ran through her. It wasn't just the words, but the way he said them, like he meant them, like he saw her in a way she hadn't seen herself in years. She didn't know when or how it happened, but suddenly, she was no longer just lying there. She was reaching for him. A part of her screamed to stop. To think about Ryan. About her marriage. About the life she had built. But another part, the part that had been starved of passion, of desire, silenced every rational thought. She turned in his grasp, her breath hitching as she met his gaze. "Are you sure?" Liam asked, his voice husky, his restraint hanging by a thread. No, she wasn't sure. But she didn't care. Instead of answering, she pulled him closer, sealing the betrayal with the one thing she could never take back. Emma had never been kissed like that before, not in years, not even by Ryan. Liam's lips were urgent, yet controlled, demanding yet inviting. It was the kind of kiss that stripped away all pretense, all hesitation, leaving nothing but raw, unfiltered need. Her fingers tightened against his shoulders, feeling the firmness of his muscles beneath his shirt. His scent, clean, masculine, with the faintest trace of sandalwood, filled her senses, making her dizzy. Her body betrayed her completely, molding against his as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The dimly lit room, the soft hum of the spa music, the flickering candlelight, it all blurred into the background. The only thing that existed now was Liam. His hands traced her sides, fingertips grazing bare skin where the towel had slipped. A fire burned low in her stomach, spreading like wildfire through every nerve in her body. She should stop. She should walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she let herself fall deeper. Liam's mouth trailed from her lips to her jaw, down to the sensitive curve of her neck. She tilted her head back, a soft gasp escaping as he pressed his lips against her pulse point. "You taste incredible," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. A shiver ran through her. She wasn't supposed to feel like this. She wasn't supposed to crave him. Yet she did. Her nails dug into his shoulders as he pulled her closer, his body pressing against hers in a way that left no doubt about how much he wanted her. Emma was drowning in it now, in the heat, the hunger, the reckless abandon of a choice she could never undo. And the worst part? She didn't want to. She didn't care about the consequences. She didn't care about Ryan. She just wanted more. And Liam was more than willing to give it to her. Liam's hands were everywhere now, pressing into her skin, urging her to lose control. Emma felt as if she were floating, no longer tethered to her life, her choices, or her responsibilities. In his touch, she found freedom, a freedom she had never dared to seek. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, quick and shallow, as she let him guide her. His touch was like fire, igniting her senses, making her skin hum with anticipation. The steady pulse of his fingers along her body made her feel like a woman reborn, a woman who could have everything, who could take whatever she wanted without fear of consequence. It was dangerous, she knew that. But danger was exhilarating. She felt alive in a way that was almost frightening. Are you sure? Liam whispered again, his voice low, the question almost rhetorical now. Emma could only nod, her lips finding his again in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent. She didn't care about the world outside this room anymore. She didn't care about the life she'd built, the man she had married, the promises she had made. In this moment, only Liam mattered. She felt him remove the towel from her body, his hands cool against her heated skin. Her heart pounded in her chest, her body trembling with the need for him. When he finally kissed her again, it was as though a dam had broken, flooding her with emotions she hadn't felt in years. She wanted him. All of him. There was no turning back now. Emma's mind raced, trying to keep up with the sensations overwhelming her. Every part of her was on fire, and yet she was eerily calm, as though she had been preparing for this moment her whole life. Liam's touch was a perfect mix of tenderness and strength. His hands slid down her body, exploring her curves with a reverence that made her heart ache. He kissed her deeply again, his tongue coaxing hers in a slow, rhythmic dance that felt almost forbidden. She could taste him now, taste the desire that was as intoxicating as the wine she used to drink at special occasions. But this wasn't special. This was raw, unfiltered passion. This was a betrayal, a sin, a moment she couldn't erase no matter how hard she tried. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, thudding against the walls of her chest as though it were a warning. But she didn't stop him. She didn't want to. Liam's body pressed against hers, and she gasped as she felt the undeniable proof of his desire. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his blue eyes dark with lust. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a velvet whisper. Emma swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what she was ready for. But she knew she wanted him, and that feeling, uncertain but electric, was enough to push her forward. She nodded, giving him the silent permission he needed. The first time he entered her, Emma felt a sharp sting of pain, unexpected, but not unwelcome. It was a reminder that this was real, that this was happening, and that there was no going back. Liam's movements were slow at first, as though he were savoring the moment, testing her limits. His body was hard and warm against hers, his breath ragged as he kissed her neck, her collarbone, everywhere he could reach. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the sensations. But all she could feel was the burning ache deep inside her, demanding more. And she gave herself over to it. As he began to move faster, harder, Emma couldn't help but gasp. Every thrust, every shift of his body brought a new wave of pleasure crashing over her. She arched into him, urging him to take her further. She should stop. She should fight this. She should remind herself of the man she had promised to love forever. But the truth was, she didn't care anymore. She didn't care about promises or vows or consequences. All she cared about was the fire coursing through her veins, the heat building between them. And Liam, relentless and determined, gave her all she needed. When it was over, Emma lay there, breathing heavily, her body drenched in sweat, a tangled mess of emotions swirling inside her. Her chest felt tight, as though she had just run a marathon. There was a strange emptiness in the pit of her stomach, guilt, but also something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Liam lay beside her, his breath still heavy, his hand resting gently on her hip. She felt his fingers tracing small, slow circles on her skin, and she had to fight the urge to flinch. She didn't want him to stop touching her, not yet. Not when she was still so lost in the aftermath. But guilt gnawed at her. A gnawing feeling that couldn't be ignored. She had just betrayed her husband, the man who had loved her for 13 years. The man who had built a life with her, fought for their family, shared so many memories. And here she was, lying with a stranger who had stolen everything she had thought she would never give away. But the truth was, she couldn't regret it. She couldn't deny the fire that had ignited inside her, the way she had felt more alive in those brief moments with Liam than she had in years. She had crossed a line, but there was something inside her that didn't want to turn back. The next morning, Emma woke with a start, her body still sore from the night before. She blinked against the light streaming through the blinds, and for a split second, she thought she had dreamed it all. But then she felt the residual warmth in her body, the dull ache that reminded her of the choices she had made. She was alone. Liam had left, but not without a reminder that this wasn't over. His business card was on the nightstand, a subtle invitation for more, should she want it. But Emma didn't know what she wanted anymore. The reality of her actions hit her like a wave. What had she done? She had betrayed Ryan in the worst possible way. And for what? A fleeting moment of passion? A connection that didn't even come close to what she had with her husband? But still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had been awakened. A part of her that had been dormant for too long, suffocated by the life she had built. And now, that part of her was screaming for more. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, snapping Emma out of her reverie. She glanced down, and her heart skipped a beat. It was from Liam. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but for a moment, she couldn't bring herself to open the message. What could he possibly want? Had she not made it clear that she was a married woman? Had she not just betrayed everything she had believed in? Yet, as much as she hated to admit it, a part of her was drawn to the text. There was a part of her that wanted to know what he had to say. Finally, her fingers trembled as she unlocked the phone and opened the message. I've been thinking about you. Last night was unforgettable. I know you're probably conflicted, but just know that I'm here if you ever want to talk. Or more. L. She stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, each one a reminder of the line she had crossed, and the one that was now waiting for her on the other side. She should ignore him. She should delete the message and forget that night ever happened. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. What was she doing? She had a family. A life. A marriage. What was she supposed to say to a man who had just rocked her world in ways she hadn't known were possible? She knew the consequences. She knew what would happen if Ryan ever found out. It would tear their marriage apart. It would ruin everything they had built. And yet, the thought of cutting off this connection, of pretending that nothing had changed, felt like a betrayal to herself. The screen glowed in the dim morning light, daring her to make a choice. Emma spent the next few hours in a state of complete turmoil. It was the calm before the storm. She moved through the motions of the day, getting ready, making breakfast for Ryan, checking in on their son, Caleb, but her mind was elsewhere. It was with Liam. The memory of his touch, his scent, the way he had made her feel was all-consuming. Ryan came home for lunch as usual, his smile wide, his eyes full of love. He kissed her on the cheek, a small gesture of affection that felt like a lie now. A lie, because Emma was no longer the woman he thought she was. She was someone else, someone who had given herself to another man, someone who had broken every vow she had ever made. Anything on your mind? Ryan asked, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. Her heart twisted at the question. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess, to beg for forgiveness, but she couldn't. The weight of her betrayal was too much to bear. And so, she smiled weakly, playing the part of the loving wife. Just tired, I guess, she replied. Ryan nodded and kissed her again, this time more tenderly, as if to reassure her. But Emma knew that, deep down, things would never be the same again. She had changed. And so had her marriage. That night, after dinner, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness that had settled deep within her. Ryan was in the living room, watching TV, but Emma's thoughts were elsewhere. She tried to focus on the mundane things, washing the dishes, checking her emails, even reading a book, but nothing could take her mind off Liam. Her phone lay on the table, just out of reach, but she could feel it calling to her. The temptation to reach for it, to read his message again, to respond to him, was overwhelming. She glanced at Ryan, sitting comfortably on the couch, oblivious to the war raging inside her. Her husband had no idea what she was going through. He had no idea what she had done. But he was so perfect, so predictable, and it only made her yearn for something more. Something that she had been missing for so long. As her thoughts swirled, Emma realized that this wasn't just about a one-night mistake. This was something deeper. She wanted more. She wanted the passion, the excitement, the thrill of being desired in a way that Ryan no longer made her feel. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Liam. Thinking about you. Let me know if you're free tonight. L. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she should even respond, but part of her couldn't resist. The part of her that was tired of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman. The part of her that was craving something more. The decision had been made. It was as if something inside Emma had finally snapped, the last threads of restraint dissolving into the ether. She couldn't deny it any longer. She was drawn to Liam in a way that she couldn't explain. Her phone, sitting silently on the table, now felt like an extension of herself. The temptation was unbearable. She had promised herself she would be strong, that she would walk away from the heat and the hunger that had ignited within her. But in that moment, with the quiet hum of the house surrounding her, she could no longer fight it. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the phone and unlocked it. The message from Liam was still there, staring back at her. She had read it a dozen times in her head, but now, as her thumb hovered over the screen, the weight of her choices pressed down on her chest. She couldn't undo what had happened. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to. Thinking about you. Let me know if you're free tonight. L. Her heart raced. There was no turning back now. She had already crossed the line, betrayed Ryan in the most intimate way. But this was different. This was a choice she could control. This was her moment to decide whether she would indulge in the passion that had taken over her soul, or whether she would walk away from it, knowing it would haunt her for the rest of her life. Emma took a deep breath and typed her response. I'm free. Let me know when and where. Her heart pounded as she pressed send. She had no idea what to expect, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The desire to feel alive, to feel wanted, had overridden her sense of right and wrong. And for the first time in years, Emma didn't care about the consequences. She waited, each second stretching longer than the last, her fingers gripping the phone as though it were her lifeline. When the notification pinged, she didn't hesitate. She opened the message immediately, as if her entire body had been waiting for this moment. Come to the same place as before. I'll be waiting. L. She stared at the words, and for a moment, she felt a wave of panic. Was she really going to do this? Was she really going to meet him again? Could she live with herself afterward? But just as quickly, the panic was replaced by a surge of adrenaline. She couldn't believe she was doing this. She had no idea what would happen, but in this moment, Emma felt alive. More alive than she had in years. She slipped into her coat, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door, leaving behind the life she had known for over a decade. As Emma drove toward the spa, the familiar city streets blurred around her. She had made this drive countless times before, each time with a sense of security, knowing she was headed toward her predictable, stable life. But tonight was different. Tonight, the road seemed to stretch into an unknown future. Her heart was in her throat, a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation flooding her senses. What was she doing? She had never imagined herself in this position. She had always been the good wife, the mother, the one who took care of everything. She had never stepped outside the boundaries of what was acceptable. But now, everything felt different. Everything felt raw and untamed. As she pulled into the parking lot of the spa, her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. On one hand, she was terrified of what would happen when she walked through those doors. On the other, she couldn't wait to feel Liam's touch again, the way he had made her feel in ways Ryan never could anymore. Emma had tried to convince herself that what she had done with Liam was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted more. She wanted to feel that thrill again, the feeling of being desired, of being alive in a way that was so different from the comfortable monotony of her marriage. She stepped out of the car, her legs shaky but determined. The spa's lights shone like beacons in the distance, pulling her toward them, toward the unknown. She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking toward the entrance. The doorbell chimed as she entered, the familiar scent of lavender and soothing music filling her senses. The receptionist greeted her with a smile, but Emma barely registered the woman's presence. All she could think about was Liam. Was he already there? Was he waiting for her? "Emma," came a voice from behind her. It was soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. She turned and found him standing in the hallway, dressed in the same dark, form-fitting shirt and jeans as before. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The world outside this room, this space, no longer existed. It was just the two of them. "Ready?" Liam asked, his voice deep and smooth, laced with the same intensity that had captivated her just days earlier. Emma nodded, unable to speak. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. But there was something about him, something about the way he made her feel, that left her powerless to say no. Without a word, Liam led her into the back room, the same one where they had shared their first intimate encounter. The soft glow of the lights, the sound of the water trickling in the fountain, the scent of lavender, all of it felt familiar, yet foreign. This was no longer just a massage. This was something else entirely. Liam closed the door behind them, his eyes never leaving hers. His gaze was full of anticipation, but there was something else too, something darker, something that made Emma's heart race even faster. "Take off your coat," he said, his voice low, commanding. It wasn't a request, it was an instruction. And for some reason, Emma didn't question it. She complied, slowly shedding the coat and hanging it on the nearby hook. She was suddenly acutely aware of the way her body was responding to him, how her breath quickened, how her skin tingled. She was afraid, but at the same time, she felt a rush of desire that she couldn't deny. Liam stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. His hand reached out, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. The simple touch sent a shock of electricity through her, and she shivered. "Emma," he murmured, his voice dark and intimate, "you have no idea how much I've been thinking about you." The tension in the room was palpable, thick with desire and anticipation. Emma could feel it in the air, in the way Liam's eyes never left hers, in the way his breath seemed to match hers, slow and deliberate. There was no turning back now. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, and everything inside her screamed to jump, to embrace the thrill that had been denied for so long. Liam stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were inches apart. He reached out, his hands tracing the curve of her jaw, a slow, deliberate motion that sent waves of heat through her body. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the sensation, before her mind caught up with her actions. She should stop this. She should turn away, walk out, go back to the life she knew, the life she had spent years building with Ryan. But something inside her refused to move. The desire, the need to feel wanted, to feel alive, overpowered everything else. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure." Before she could finish the sentence, his lips were on hers, silencing her doubts, silencing her fears. The kiss was urgent, filled with the hunger they had both tried to ignore. His hands roamed to her back, pulling her closer, as if he couldn't get enough of her. Emma's body responded instinctively, her hands sliding up to his chest, feeling the hard muscles beneath his shirt. She had never felt anything like this before. The fire inside her was roaring now, unstoppable, consuming her every thought. The kiss deepened, slow and hungry, a silent battle between restraint and release. Emma's hands moved, guided by a mix of impulse and the unfamiliar desire surging through her veins. She felt his body pressing against hers, the heat between them undeniable, as if all the years of neglect, of quiet yearning, were culminating in this moment. For a brief second, reality crashed back into Ryan. Their son. The life she had worked so hard to build. But it was only a fleeting thought, quickly swallowed by the torrent of sensations flooding her. Her body felt alive, each nerve ending ignited by Liam's touch, the way his hands were roaming, coaxing, exploring. She pulled back for a breath, her chest heaving. Her heart was pounding in her ears, and she could barely hear the soft strains of music playing in the background. But there was something about the way Liam was looking at her, his eyes dark, intense, as though he could see into the very depths of her soul. And in those depths, Emma saw a reflection she hadn't recognized, a woman who was hungry for something more, something that had been missing for far too long. "I've wanted this from the moment I saw you," Liam murmured, his lips grazing her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "You've been a ghost in your own life, Emma. But now, you're here. You're real." The words hit her like a lightning strike, raw and true. He was right. She had been a ghost. A woman trapped in a cage of her own making, living a life that looked perfect from the outside but lacked the fire she desperately craved. With Ryan, there had been no passion left. No desire. Just duty. Just routine. But Liam was a spark. A dangerous, intoxicating spark that threatened to set everything on fire. Her mind raced, but her body knew what it wanted. And it wanted him. She was no longer thinking about the consequences. No longer thinking about the life she would have to return to. She was consumed with the heat between them, the electric pull that kept her tethered to him. Liam's hands slid down her body, pulling her closer, until their bodies were flush against each other. Emma gasped at the contact, her body already reacting to him. The tension in her chest, the tightness in her core, it all exploded into something far more primal. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Liam whispered, his lips trailing down her neck, sending shivers of pleasure racing through her. "You're not just his wife. You're more. So much more." The words felt like a balm to her wounded soul. They were the validation she had sought for so long, the acknowledgement of her own worth. Not as a mother or a wife, but as a woman who still had the power to command desire. Emma's hands moved with newfound urgency, pushing Liam's shirt off his shoulders, her fingers grazing over his chest, feeling the hardness of his muscles beneath her touch. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the same heat that mirrored the fire inside her. The tension that had built between them was unbearable now, and Emma knew that nothing could stop what was about to happen. Liam stepped back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. There was something in his eyes, something hungry, something that mirrored her own desire. "Take off your clothes," he commanded softly, but the way he said it, the low, possessive tone, made Emma's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And Emma, in that moment, couldn't find it in herself to say no. She had crossed the line once, and now the line didn't matter. She wanted to feel alive. She wanted to feel wanted. She wanted to feel the passion that she had denied herself for so long. With trembling hands, she slowly undressed, each movement deliberate, as if she were shedding the last remnants of the life she had once known. Her clothes fell to the floor in a soft cascade, leaving her vulnerable, exposed. She stood before him, every inch of her body on display, every inch of her desire laid bare. Liam's eyes darkened as he took in the sight of her, his lips curling into a slow, appreciative smile. "Beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with admiration and something more. "You're perfect." The compliment, simple yet sincere, sent a rush of warmth through Emma. For the first time in years, someone saw her. Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as the woman she had forgotten she could be. The woman who still had the power to captivate, to demand attention. Liam stepped forward, his hands reaching for her, pulling her back toward him. He kissed her again, deeper this time, with an intensity that made Emma's head spin. His hands roamed down her body, his touch sending jolts of pleasure through her. She could feel his growing desire pressing against her, and the realization hit her like a tidal wave. She was no longer just participating. She was all in. She wanted him as much as he wanted her. There was no going back now. The next few moments were a blur of sensation. It was as if Emma had stepped into a world of pure indulgence, where nothing else mattered except the need to feel, to taste, to experience every inch of this raw connection with Liam. The soft sounds of the spa, the ambient music, all faded into the background as Emma lost herself in the storm of emotions and desires swirling within her. Liam's hands were everywhere, on her skin, in her hair, pulling her closer, guiding her through a dance that felt both slow and urgent at the same time. Each kiss was a promise, each touch an invitation to something darker, deeper. Emma couldn't remember the last time she had felt this alive, this powerful, this wanted. But with every passing moment, there was a growing sense of unease gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. The consequences of her actions, of what she was doing, loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon, ready to consume her. The problem was that she didn't care. Liam's lips moved lower, trailing kisses down her neck, across her chest, as he slowly lowered her onto the massage table. The warmth of the room, the smoothness of the linens beneath her, all seemed to heighten the intensity of the moment. He moved with purpose, with control, and Emma couldn't help but follow his lead. She was a willing participant, a woman surrendering to her deepest desires, knowing that once she crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. His hands explored her body, his fingers tracing every curve, every inch of her skin, as though memorizing the feel of her. And in return, Emma's hands sought him out, desperate to feel every part of him, to mark this moment as something uniquely hers. Liam's touch was like fire, igniting a passion that Emma had long since buried under layers of duty, of responsibility. She had forgotten what it was like to be desired, to be touched, to feel the weight of another person's hunger for her. But now, in this moment, everything else faded away. There was only Liam. And there was only her. The world around Emma had ceased to exist. There was only Liam and the fire consuming them both. His lips, his hands, his every movement was a force she couldn't resist. The boundaries between right and wrong had dissolved, leaving nothing but the raw, undeniable need that pulsed between them. Liam's mouth moved down her body, each kiss igniting a new wave of warmth, a new surge of passion. Her body responded instinctively, her hands tangling in his hair, urging him closer, deeper. Every inch of her skin felt alive under his touch, every sensation heightened, magnified by the intensity of the moment. She could feel the weight of his body pressing against hers, the heat of him surrounding her, enveloping her in a way she had never known. There was no room for hesitation, no time for second thoughts. She was drowning in him, in the pleasure, in the release that was long overdue. Liam's hands were everywhere, on her hips, her thighs, her back. He touched her as though he knew her body better than she knew it herself, each movement sure and confident. It was as if he had unlocked something inside her that had been buried for so long, something that she hadn't even known existed. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her body trembling beneath him as he moved with deliberate slowness. He was in control, guiding her through the storm of sensation, and Emma let him. She needed this. She needed him. Do you want this? Liam's voice was low, a whisper against her skin. He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes, as if searching for the answer in her gaze. The question wasn't necessary, Emma knew what she wanted, knew what she had come here for. But there was something about the way he asked it that made her pulse quicken, made her heart race. Yes, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. I want this. With that, Liam's lips found hers again, and the kiss deepened, more urgent now, more desperate. His hands moved with purpose, stripping away the last remnants of her clothing, leaving her bare and vulnerable beneath him. But instead of feeling exposed, Emma felt powerful. She was claiming this moment, this experience, for herself. She was taking what she wanted, without guilt, without shame. As Liam's body pressed against hers once more, Emma couldn't help but moan softly, her body arching into his. The heat between them was unbearable, a fire that threatened to consume them both, and yet, Emma didn't want it to stop. She didn't want to pull away. She was lost in him now, lost in the feeling of his hands on her skin, his lips on her body, the relentless rhythm that they had fallen into. She had never felt more alive, more desired, more herself. But even as she gave herself over to the moment, a flicker of doubt tried to creep into her mind. What was this? What was happening? She had crossed a line that had been drawn in her mind for years. She had never imagined herself in this position, never thought she would betray Ryan, the man who had been her partner for so long. But in that moment, with Liam's touch pulling her further into the abyss, the line no longer mattered. There was only now. Only this. Only Liam. As the moments stretched on, Emma's mind was consumed by the heat, the need, the overwhelming sense of desire. There was no longer any room for doubt or hesitation. She was here, in this moment, and nothing else existed. But as the intensity of their passion reached its peak, the reality of what was happening started to creep back into Emma's consciousness. She couldn't ignore it forever. The guilt, the fear, the shame, they were all lurking just beneath the surface, threatening to drag her under. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She was betraying Ryan. She was betraying the man who had loved her, who had stood by her through everything. But even as those thoughts tried to surface, Emma pushed them away. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Not when she had tasted something so raw, so powerful, something she had never known she was missing. Liam's hands were still on her, his touch still sending waves of pleasure through her body. She arched against him, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the sensations flooded her. It was as if all of her repressed desires, all the longing she had buried for so long, were now rushing to the surface, demanding to be felt, demanding to be acknowledged. She needed this. She needed him. And so, she let herself fall deeper into the moment, deeper into the overwhelming pleasure that Liam was giving her. She didn't want to think about the consequences, didn't want to think about what would happen once this was over. She just wanted to feel. To be. Liam's movements were slow, deliberate, each one a quiet command, a silent promise that everything would be okay. But Emma knew that it wouldn't be. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not after this. As the climax of their passion built to a crescendo, Emma's body tensed, her mind clouded by the intensity of the experience. She cried out, her voice lost in the rush of emotions that consumed her. And then, as the storm of pleasure finally broke, she collapsed against Liam, gasping for breath, her body trembling with the aftershocks of what they had just shared. For a moment, all was still. All was quiet. But as the silence settled over them, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Emma was left with a feeling of emptiness, a hollow ache deep in her chest. She had crossed a line. She had betrayed the man she had promised to love forever. And she knew there was no going back. The world felt different now, somehow. The air around Emma seemed heavier, charged with a strange electricity that left her feeling both exhilarated and empty at the same time. Her body was still humming with the aftereffects of their encounter, every nerve alive with the memory of what had just transpired. But beneath the surface, there was a growing sense of dread, a quiet realization that everything had changed. Liam was still beside her, his breath steady against her skin, but Emma couldn't help but feel a sudden distance between them. It was as though the intimacy they had shared had fractured something within her. What was this? What was she doing? Are you okay? Liam's voice was soft, his hand gently brushing her hair away from her face. Emma nodded slowly, though she wasn't sure if she was being truthful. Her emotions were a whirlwind, torn between the undeniable pleasure of what they had just shared and the guilt gnawing at her insides. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words didn't feel true. Not entirely. Liam didn't push. Instead, he just held her, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt comforting, yet somehow unsettling. She had wanted this. She had wanted him. But now that it was over, she wasn't sure what she had expected. The relief she had hoped for didn't come. Instead, there was only a gnawing emptiness, a sense that she had lost something important, something that could never be regained. She tried to push the thoughts away, tried to focus on the present, on the warmth of Liam's body next to hers, but it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of dread that had settled deep within her chest. Days passed, but the weight of what had happened between Emma and Liam didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier, settling like a cloud over her every thought. She went through the motions of her daily life, pretending nothing had changed, but inside, she was unraveling. Her marriage to Ryan had always been steady, solid. They had been through so much together, raising their son, buying their home, building a life from scratch. But now, every smile Ryan gave her felt like a reminder of her betrayal. Every kiss felt wrong. Every casual touch felt like a lie. Emma could no longer look at him without remembering what she had done. It wasn't just the physical act with Liam that haunted her. It was the fact that she had crossed a line she never thought she would cross. She had betrayed the man who had been her rock, her partner, her best friend for 13 years. And every time she looked into his eyes, she saw the trust he had placed in her, a trust she had shattered. Ryan was oblivious. He went about his days with the same quiet devotion he always had. He didn't notice the shift in her. He didn't see the way her smiles no longer reached her eyes. But Emma couldn't ignore it. The guilt was consuming her, gnawing at her from the inside. And every time she was alone, the memories of her encounter with Liam surged back, vivid and intense. She had never thought she would be capable of something like this. She had always prided herself on being faithful, on being the perfect wife. But with Liam, everything had been different. He had made her feel alive in a way Ryan never had. He had shown her a side of herself she didn't even know existed. But now, that side of her felt like a dangerous stranger, something she couldn't control. And the longer she stayed in her marriage, the more she realized that she had changed. She was no longer the woman she had been when she and Ryan first met. She was someone else, someone who had tasted something forbidden and couldn't forget the sweetness of it. Emma's internal conflict was tearing her apart. She loved Ryan, but she was terrified of facing the truth. She couldn't tell him what had happened, couldn't bring herself to confess the depth of her betrayal. And yet, every day, the guilt became harder to bear. She was trapped in a web of lies, and the longer she stayed in it, the more she felt like she was suffocating. It wasn't long before Emma reached her breaking point. The weight of her guilt, the pressure of keeping the secret, the growing distance between her and Ryan, it all became too much to bear. She couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't live with herself, pretending everything was fine when it was anything but. One evening, after a long day of pretending, she found herself sitting alone in their living room. Ryan had gone out for a work dinner, and their son was at a sleepover. The house was quiet, eerily quiet. Emma sat on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, staring at the empty space in front of her. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in her thoughts, her emotions swirling in a chaotic mess. But eventually, the door opened, and Ryan walked in, his face lighting up as he saw her sitting in the living room. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice warm and full of affection. "How was your day?" Emma didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she couldn't keep lying anymore. She had to tell him the truth. She had to be honest, even if it meant losing everything. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." Ryan's expression shifted slightly, concern flickering in his eyes. He sat down beside her, his hand finding hers. "What is it, Em?" Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She felt as though the walls were closing in around her. "I've made a terrible mistake," she whispered. I betrayed you." For a moment, Ryan didn't say anything. He just stared at her, as if trying to process her words. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, the fear of what was to come overwhelming her. She had kept this secret for so long, and now, the truth was finally spilling out. There was no turning back. I slept with someone else," she choked out, the words feeling like a weight lifting off her chest even as they shattered everything. It was a mistake, Ryan. A huge mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." Ryan's face went pale. His hand froze in hers, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Emma could see the shock in his eyes, the hurt, the confusion. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. "I don't know what to say," Ryan finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to feel." Emma felt the tears welling in her eyes. She had never wanted to hurt him. She had never wanted to destroy the life they had built together. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "I'm so sorry, Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen. But it did, and I can't take it back. I wish I could, but I can't." Ryan just stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. The silence between them was deafening. Emma could feel the rupture in their relationship, the crack that had appeared between them, and she knew that no amount of apologies or explanations could repair the damage she had done. And as the weight of her betrayal sank in, Emma realized that she had lost something more than just Ryan's trust. She had lost herself. She had lost the person she once was, the woman who believed in love, in loyalty, in honesty. And now, she was left with nothing but the hollow ache of regret.